So, how to end the struggle and be at peace. It's a bit of a dramatic title, but we all have little struggles. We've all got either relationship struggles or health struggles or career struggles or financial struggles. They're probably the big four. There's not many people who don't have any of those, I would imagine. So how do you end the struggle and be at peace? I'm afraid we're going to start with some bad news. Can't end the struggle. As life is about having these sorts of struggles. They don't just disappear. And we actually probably have fewer struggles than a lot of people. So I spent a lot of time in India, actually, and I've seen quite a few struggles there, and some quite simple things stick in my mind. For example, one thing is I was staying in an ashram once, and the way rubbish was dealt with is you had to take it in big bags to an open field and put it in that field as a designated field for rubbish. And I was on rubbish duty one day, and I took these big bags to the field, and we dumped the bags there. And there were a load of animals waiting. There were foxes and some birds and things just waiting to rummage through the rubbish. And there were also some people waiting to see if they could find something to eat or something that they could make or sell, because they didn't have any other means of making an existence. I've also seen people on I was in a motorway service station once, and there was a very thin, naked, disoriented woman in there, just looking for something to eat and getting chased out by the shop owner with a broom. So there are real struggles that a lot of people have, and the relatively small ones that we have are much less than that. But we can't end those. We can't make them totally disappear because they're the circumstances of life. But there is some good news. And the good news is you can be at peace with the struggle, especially the sorts of struggles that most of us have. And I'm reminded of another person that I met once, and this time it was in Georgia. I don't spend all my life traveling around the world, but I, when I do, it's like you meet interesting people. And we were traveling down to the coast, and again on the motorway there was a man selling peanuts, and we stopped to buy peanuts on the way down as a snack. And I looked at this man, and he was probably in his 30s or something, but he had wrinkles from being in the blazing sun all day every day. I was talking to him busy. He had to get up very early in the morning to come there. He spent his whole day there. He went back. He got very little money for it. And I said to him, it must be really difficult having a life like that. And he looked at me with a big beaming smile, and he said, "No, sir, I'm really grateful for my life. I give thanks to the good Lord every day for everything I have." I have to apologize to anybody who might be watching this in the deep south of America, because I love the accent, but my tribute to it is not wonderful. So he was really happy with his life, even though he had far greater struggles than the smaller ones, the relatively small ones that we have. So what would you say, to opening it up to you just for a moment, what would you say was the difference between this man who was really happy despite having that sort of life and us, or us when we're not happy, or when we let our small struggles get us down? What makes him happy? And come to think of it, that Indian woman who was waiting for the rubbish to browse through the rubbish, the one I have in mind, she seemed quite joyful as well. She seemed quite light and purposeful. She didn't seem down or heavy about her life. What makes them better able to deal with their struggle, do you think?
Attitude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. What do you think enables them to have that more positive attitude?
Well, because they have the perception of life differently.
Yes, that's pretty much exactly it, Marina. It's like they choose to put their attention on the positive. And it can sound like a really glib thing to say and a really superficial thing to say. Just focus on the positive and everything will be right. But it does have it does make physiological differences that we'll talk about in a moment. But the message for now is be careful where you put your attention, because it creates your environment. It creates your experience. It creates your experience of life. And actually, I'm going to suggest that it does a bit more than create your experience of life. It actually changes the reality of your life. And I'm gonna bring in a guy who I have a lot of admiration for. You've probably heard of him, called Bruce Lipton, and he's done a lot of research and put together a lot of research, and he's done a lot of talking as well, and sort of brought a lot of ideas to the public attention about this, about how important it is what you do with your mind. He's quite fresh in my mind at the moment because my son, who's 11, he loves all of this stuff, and so we watch someone like Bruce Lipton or Greg Braden every Saturday morning after breakfast. We do something like that, and it's a really good way to start the weekend. And I'm going to bring up a few things that he's either responsible for researching and demonstrating himself, or that he talks about and brings to attention in support of the work that he does. And they become progressively more counterintuitive as they go along, but they go together really well, and they give us really the tools for what we can do in terms of changing our perception of life. And the first one is some research that he did, some really pioneering research that he did more than 50 years ago. This will be easy to accept and to take on board, because now this sort of thing is mainstream. But when he came up with it in the 60s, it was way out there, and he was quite ostracized for a while for coming up with this. So he did research into stem cells, and he came up with the idea that stem cells, he came not with the idea, but with the proof that stem cells adapt to their environment. He was teaching in a university. His job was to teach people that everybody is, your destiny is determined by your genes. If you have a certain gene type, you're, going to get a certain type of disease. You're going to have this mental condition or whatever it is through your life. He was doing research, and he was putting stem cells into dishes and watching them reproduce. And because they were all genetically identical, they were reproducing in an identical way. And this was the received wisdom at the time. Then he had an idea. He said, what about if I put these stem cells in a different environment, a different biological environment? So he put the one set of stem cells, genetically identical stem cells, one in some bone tissue, another one in some muscle tissue, another one in skin tissue. And what he found was that the cells changed to match the environment that they were put into. And this was a really big revolution in epigenetics, which was at a very young stage at the time, because it sort of challenged that whole idea that the genes are predetermined to lead you in a certain direction in your life, because these were genetically identical genes going in all sorts of different directions because of their environment. And he extrapolated that to the whole body as well. So for the individual cells, how they develop physically depends on their physical environment. For the body and our being, our entity, what is our environment? Our environment comes from our physical environment, really, our chemical environment comes from the brain chemistry. And where does the brain chemistry come from? It originates with our thoughts. If we put our thoughts on positive things, positive hormones come through. The brain is just like a computer. It releases what it's programmed to release. So you program in positive thoughts, positive hormones come up. It is feel-good hormones, things that make you feel good. You focus on the difficulties. You think, my life is difficult. I have this problem. I can't solve this problem. You get stress hormones released. They make you feel more stressful. So where we put our thought affects our brain chemistry. Our brain chemistry affects the environment of our body, and that affects how we develop on a cellular level and on every other level. It affects how we feel as well. But he goes further with this. So this is a little bit more surprising because this is newer research. This has been around for less time, but it's very conclusive that it's been found that the brain and the heart, and particularly the heart, several thousand times more, have strong electromagnetic fields. And these fields, they change on an atomic level what's around us. So what that means in terms of the environment, in terms of the reality that's around us in our lives, that's manifesting around us, that we think of as physical reality, it's still in the very, very early stages of research. But you can guess, you can really guess, and you can really think around what the implications of this are in terms of us being able to create the sort of life not only within us about how we feel, but what's manifesting outside of us. And then he brings in quantum physics, and the most surprising of these three discoveries, but what quantum physics is quite definite about, is that nothing exists until it's perceived by a conscious observer. So you must have heard. You must have heard of Schrodinger's cat. It's a famous experiment where the thinker Schrodinger, he demonstrated the quantum principle by saying, look, I've got a box here, and inside the box is a cat, and he's asking people, is the cat dead or alive? And the truth is, from a quantum perspective, that until the box is opened and you look at the cat, you can't be 100% sure whether the cat is dead or alive. And it's an extrapolation of the what you might have heard about in quantum physics called the double slit experiment, where light exists in both particle and wave forms. It demonstrates properties of both until you sort of put a little camera on it and you sort of hone in and you look, and then it chooses one or the other. But until then, it's both. This was really perplexing for quantum scientists, and quantum physics is one of the most researched and most documented and most credible branches of science. But it's also one that is most surprising and most counterintuitive in terms of how we perceive our lives generally. But the implication is that our thought and where we put our attention creates our reality. And that leads us to some more good news, which is that it's all in our hands. If it's all about where we put our attention, all we need to do is put our attention in a positive place. Easy, simple, yeah? Not quite. It's a little bit more complicated than that. One of the things that Bruce Lipton is also really interested in is looking at what happens in the first 7 years of life. And in the first 7 years of life, our consciousness isn't fully developed in the sense that it is at an older stage. And what our function is basically for those first 7 years is to absorb what we see around us. It's a way for the species to sort of pass its learning on. A small child observes everything, learns from its parents and the people around it. So how many children do you think grow up with perfectly balanced parents, perfectly balanced role models everywhere in life? Not many. Chances are they're going to see arguments at home. They're going to see all of their parents' faults and weaknesses. They're not going to perceive them as faults or weaknesses. They'll just perceive them as things that you take in. And we all do this. We all just take in and we learn. So, one of the parents has an addictive personality. You're going to get an addictive personality because you learn that way of thinking and that way of managing life. One of the parents has a tendency towards depression. You're going to learn that way of thinking, and you're going to wire your brain because that's what you do in the first 7 years of life to fit in, to basically learn. So the bad news is that we're all pre-programmed to self-sabotage. There may be a couple of lucky people in the world who are pre-programmed to manifest the best in life, but that's not very common. So that sort of puts a bit of a downer on on what we talked about before, about how it's all in our hands, doesn't it? But there is a final piece of good news. It's a little bit more difficult than to just change how you think. That's not that simple, but there are ways to change the program. And let's have a look at what some of those are. Spirituality is, for me, I think it's absolutely foundational. You know, if you want to change the way that your mind works, you need a foundation. You need a really strong foundation of, you know, because what I found, and the particular spiritual path that I've been on for the past 20 years, I tried a few before that, but I really settled down into one called Heartfulness. And I found it really changes, not my experience of the world, but my experience of myself. And actually, the way I often talk about it is that it's the reason why I'm still alive at the moment. You know, when I was in my 20s, I was in a place where I probably had a few years left in me. And it was Heartfulness that sort of fed a need that I didn't know I had at the time, and gave me that sort of that inner sense, you know, that even though I had still had a lot of problems on the outside, gave me that inner sense of well-being and that inner sense of being really nourished that that I needed to be able to keep going. So I think that being on a spiritual path is fundamental, because otherwise you might find a way, you might do things and change your life and get what you want, but you're not going to be any happier with it. And I saw you know, you see these Facebook little videos, and there was one that featured a letter from Steve Jobs when he was in his final days. And he was talking about how he achieved in his life everything that he ever dreamt of, and that most people would be, you know, looking at him with great admiration and great respect and wanting to be like him and wanting to be as successful as him. He actually died quite a miserable man, because having what he wanted wasn't as fulfilling as he thought it was going to be. And you need to have that spiritual dimension to sort of break that dependence on the external world to give you what you want. And then it's much easier to bring about the changes that you want in the external world, and to be more satisfied with them, and to be not so attached to them. So if Heartfulness sounds interesting, you can go to the Heartful Healing website. You can find out more about Heartfulness. Another piece that's not so critical, but it is quite important, because if you don't have good nutrition, you know, and your body's full of stodge, and it's not working properly, and you're sort of attracting pathogens, and you know, it's making you heavy, you're not really going to be in a state of mind to be able to be positive about stuff. So nutrition is something that can that can unlock you know, your ability to focus on the positive, or at least start to, or at least play a part in it. The problem is there's so many different schools of thought on nutrition, and you really need to find your own, and find one that works for you. The one that I followed, and I found it worked extremely well for me, and I'm still living in a lot of ways by the diet of it, which is, you know, pretty much very, very highly concentrated nutrition in fruits and vegetables largely. And that's the medical medium approach. I think that's worth checking out. So that's another sort of one that works well in the background. And then we come to the main thing that is going to change the programming, and that's energy healing, through which we can directly reprogram the mind. Bruce Lipton used a technique called Psych-K, because that was available at the time that he was practicing. I would like to think that if he was practicing now, he would be using what I use, which is the body code, and soon the belief code. The body code can do, it's something that it can deal with a whole load of different sorts of issues, physical, emotional, whatever else. But it can play a role in reprogramming the mind and changing beliefs as well. And I do this quite often with people. I take a belief that they have that's holding them back. We can quantify the extent to which subconsciously they believe it, and we can progressively get rid of this idea and replace it with something positive. So as an example, and there's a testimony, if you go to the testimonials page on Heartful Healing, right at the bottom, there's a really long one from a lady who had this, she came and she believed that she had this core belief that I don't deserve help. So we looked at this, we sort of found it, we quantified it. I think it was like she was believing it up at well into the 90s, 98% or 99% or something. And over a few sessions, we brought that down to 0 and we instilled in, I deserve help, up to 100%. And after we'd finished this, literally the next day, she found that there were 5 or 6, I think more than 6 examples of people who came to her spontaneously offering help. Some of them were complete strangers. Some of them were people that she knew in passing but didn't have a relationship with. And they all came to her spontaneously offering help. So it's just an example of how the change in belief can affect, can bring about a change in life. And coming soon is a new modality, which I've experienced, but isn't available for training yet. So as soon as it is, I'm going to become certified in the belief code and offer it. And that's, the body code can do all of this stuff, but what it can't do is to tell you what the belief is. You have to find the belief, work on a process of understanding what you think the belief is, and then we can work with that. And often it's the right one and it brings about changes, but it might not be the one that's at the heart of it. The belief code will help us to identify what exactly the belief is that's bringing about a certain result, so that we can change that. And as far as I know, as far as I'm aware, because I've looked, there's nothing else around at the moment that can actually do that. And something I've discovered quite recently is quantum biofeedback. And that's what I currently do for myself and my family and offer to clients as well. It comes in the form of this little machine called a Healy, a personal quantum biofeedback machine. Now, this also works on many levels. I'm currently, as I speak, I'm running a program on it called Coherence, which is about bringing the heart and the head into alignment. And I always run that on myself while I'm giving some sort of talk or making a video or something. But another thing that it can do, and I do quite a lot, is that you can program in to the machine vibrations of certain beliefs that you want to believe more. So and then you can transmit, you can vibrate the frequencies of these beliefs to you for as long as you want. You can do it all day if you want to. So I recently put one in, a set in about being joyful. I put in a list of beliefs about, I'm feeling really joyful. I'm grateful for all the joy in my life and all of these sorts of things. And I've been running it, and I have to say it's made a really big difference in terms of how I feel about things. So these are some ways that I'm sure there are other energy healing modalities that work on the reprogramming of beliefs as well. But these are the ones that I found and that I found to be absolutely effective and transformative, actually. So there we are, some thoughts on how to end the struggle and be at peace. I'm open to any questions.
Guy, I just want to say before we do open up to any questions, if you wouldn't mind just stop sharing. That was amazing, absolutely fantastic, and you should see all the comments that are coming. So it's provoking a lot of conversation in the comments.
Okay, good.
It's obviously resonating with a lot of us.